Welcome, welcome. So at the advice of my wife, I'm on the stage because she thought it would look better with the lights. So, okay. And I guess people were afraid of the spit zone down there. So I get it. It's real. You pay extra, yes. We'll hand out the ponchos, like the Gallagher show that you used to go to. Or if you go to Blue Man Group, it's the same thing. The splash zone. You've got to be aware. Well, welcome. It's great to see you guys. Just a quick little housekeeping. We are recording everything, and so if you come down the aisle while I'm up here, you'll be on the recording. That's why we have chairs, so that if you need to go out and through the door. Make it a little bit easier. If you want to be on the video, then by all means, walk right into it. That'd be great. The first one is up from Class 1. I'll get Class 2 and 3 up this week also. And I'll send out a link via Beverly. So if you have registered in the church with this course, you will get an email however you registered. Okay. If you want to get a head start on that before the email comes out, my podcast in business is Sexy Marriage Radio. If you go to YouTube and just type in Sexy Marriage Radio, it's there under a playlist, Marriage by Divine Design. Plus, there's 252 episodes if you wanted to listen, videos of our show if you want to just listen to your heart's content. But yeah, so it's under, I'm just putting it on my site just because it's all one location and a playlist. So 1, 2, and 3 will be out by this week. You can catch up. Just the other thing to be aware of is Class 2 did not get the full class. We hit the capacity on the little drive I had at the time. So what happens when you're full? You're full. So as we get started, anything kind of rattling around that's important to bring up as we get rolling today? My mic on? Good recording at all? Pardon me. I'm just going to walk right into the camera. Is it just low? Test. Now I'm there? Okay. Well, apparently, volume has to be up to make it work. All right, so we'll start all over. Welcome. Good to see you guys. Anything rattling around besides my mic not being on that we need to jump into this leftover from last week? Oh, question. Yes, I hear you. What's your question? Okay, perfect. Well, here, let's just jump right in. Well, where we've landed thus far, is I want to kind of frame tonight from the scripture in Psalms 139. Verse 23 and 24, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. Search me and know my heart. I think that's something we would cry out to God, but I think it's also something we would benefit from by knowing our own heart, by knowing our own ways. Case in point, this morning, I did the host job at church this morning, and so when I was leaving after second service, one of the couples used to be on the Re-Engage team was very complimentary. He's like, Corey, you did a great job as always. To which I replied, I just do my small little part and then get out of the way, right? To which then Josh, way to diminish their compliment. Catch that, because that's exactly what I did, and that's what friends do. I think is a good move of. I totally deflected what was offered up to me and did not accept that. Because one of the things we as human beings have struggled with, I believe, is receiving things. Anybody of you have trouble? Somebody gives you a gift and you're like, feel weird? And you like make up a big explanation about why they didn't need to do that? Or somebody goes out of their way to help you and you're like, oh. Or you go out of the way to help and they say thank you and you're like, oh. I mean, it's such a common human trait. And one of the things I think that's important that I'm understanding about myself is I have trouble sometimes accepting things that come my way. Because there's this element of us that we feel like we have to earn it. Tom, where are you? Can you go turn this down just a little bit? There's a little pop. I got it too loud. Are we on? Test 1, 2? Okay. Yay. This is not exposing at all. I don't feel exposed at all up here. This is like a little example of what's going on. Okay, now let's roll. So, I don't even know where we were. Psalm 139 of search me and know my ways. Search me and know my heart. That's a deep, thorough investigation of who you are. We have been framing this verse, if you think about it, through the lens of exposure versus entitlement. Because we all come into relationships in one of two camps. Usually it's going to be a little bit of both. I have an entitlement mentality of, I am married to you, so therefore I am now owed something. Or there's an exposure camp, which is knowing me being in a close relationship with somebody else is going to expose me to me. And a lot of times what happens is when we think of what goes on in marriage where somebody points something out about ourselves that we don't like, we often can react and blame them for pointing it out, even though it's something in myself that's being exposed. That's why they're pointing it out. And it's usually not insidious and intentional. It's just the fact that you live close proximity with each other. You can't hide who you are in a household. Although we hope sometimes we can. We hope sometimes we won't get caught in whatever our normal, everyday gremlin thing is. Because we all have tendencies based on how we were raised. I mentioned last week, I believe it was, that I have a genealogy of laziness. There's a lazy gene in my family. There's also, I have discovered, there is a tendency of my family of origin to omit things. Kind Christian way to say I come from a family of liars. I am one of them. I fight this. And apparently I can pass this on to my son. Because he did this flat out to me, working in the yard. I don't know if I told this story, but we were outside in the winter. We're working on the gate. It's he and I. He's 4. And I'm like, what a chance to get an opportunity to understand power tools, buddy. Let's go outside. And so we're working. And I leave to come, and then I come back and I pick up the saw and I start, and it's unplugged. And I'm like, okay. And I'm looking, no. And I go all the way around to the back of the house where the extension cord was plugged in and it was unplugged. And I come back to him. It's like, buddy, did you unplug the cord? He's like, no. And I'm like, it's you and I out here only. It's you or it's me. Which is it? I didn't. And I'm like, don't lie to a liar, dude. I know this game. Right? But it's just this element of how often do we do this where something gets caught, we're caught in something. And it's not necessarily something that I've been trying to hide. It's just I got caught in something. It's a personality trait. It's a tendency. And all of a sudden that's pointed out and I will do everything I can to hide that. Or I'll blame my spouse for bringing it up. That's what's going on when you're talking about this idea of it being exposed. Things are going to come out. And the best thing I believe you can do for your marriage, for your family life, and just for sure your own life is embrace that process of exposure and grow up. That's the ultimate goal. Is challenge yourself to know who it is that you're talking about because you're talking about yourself. I also have a tendency that I call it a shiny syndrome. I know I'm not alone in this, but I have had far too many vehicles in my life because after apparently 2 years, they're not shiny anymore. And I must go get a new one because that's shiny. Right? So it's just this element of that's a tendency of who I am. That doesn't mean it's a great thing. It's not a virtue by any means. But it's the dynamic I am. Well, I'm married to a woman that will just drive something till it literally falls apart and she'll leave the key in it and walk away. I mean, I think that's literally what happened if there was not a safety concern. But I mean, 250,000 miles is an easy goal for my wife in a vehicle. Well, when we were several years ago, we were talking about the possible stages of what life would look like after kids grow up and move on out of the house. We had a couple of different scenarios we wanted to go down. And so at that point, I'm sitting here planning, what should we do? How could we do this? And so I'm bringing up an idea that involves shiny, but how do I do that knowing it's going to be seen as, oh, here's shiny guy. Right? Because I know my wife, she's going to see that. I have, believe me, 31 years of trying to act like I'm not shiny guy. And it's never gotten past her. She sees it. And so what I did, because I'm recognizing and trying to be better at exposing and understanding who I am, I brought up, and this is actually, I think, the way I phrased it, realizing this sounds exactly like shiny guy, I want to bring up something that I think we need to at least discuss. And she's, okay, because that was a different move, yeah? That was a completely different move. So I kind of threw her off a little bit because I owned who I am in that moment. When a lot of times, the reason our spouse reacts the way they do is because they recognize how blind you are to yourself. But what's so funny about that is, your spouse is saying the same thing about you. That's what is in the pressure of a marriage. And that's what I believe God designed marriage as a way to expose ourselves to ourselves. Relationships do this too. Every other relationship does it too. It's just higher and higher up the hierarchy you go, the more exposure happens, the more tension, the more pressure, the more dynamic that is at play. Does everybody follow? Because I really believe there's another verse in Matthew 7 where it's talking about the plank versus the speck. How often we take on the plank in my partner's eyes or somebody else's, or wait. How about I get the verse right? How about I'm worried about the speck in my partner's eye rather than not realizing I have a plank in my own. Because I really believe God cares about our character and our wisdom and our maturing. And the process He makes that happen is exposing ourselves to ourselves. Okay, so let's look at how this plays out. Because there's a lot of different times, so if you think about it, this is a quote from David Olson, that it's the nature of all pre-marrieds to be idealistically distorted about each other. Put another way, we all come into relationships with rose-colored glasses. And I heard a phrase just 2 weeks ago in one of my groups. A guy said, when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, red flags just look like regular flags. Yeah, okay, that's true. That's totally true, right? And what's so interesting about that is, we know it, but we don't know it. Right? I know this is probably not going to go well, but I do it anyway. Right? I mean, that is the war within us. That is the struggle that happens. And relationships are one of the best conduits for helping us grow up. And so the idealistically distorted aspect plays into our relationships. And then as we continue going through a relationship, we continue to be distorted in a variety of ways. We continue to not really know who we are until I have the courage to really ask myself some questions. Because here's the other way this plays out. If you had a traditional wedding and you had the traditional wedding vows, you likely in there had some sort of phraseology of for better or for worse. And it's almost like this unspoken expectation of the for worse will be as little as possible. Right? Because I'm working on that. I got that. And then what's so insidious, and I mean this word intentionally, is when we get further into marriage, we say, well, you said for better or for worse. This is for worse. This is me. You're going to have to just accept it. This is just who I am. And we all have various ways we say this. This is just me. This is just the way I do things. This is just my preference. Not realizing what is that saying to my spouse? What is that message? Because it's basically saying, I'm not going to handle me. You have to. And we can even go a little bit deeper and add in the context of, but you said you love me, or the real coup de grace of this, the unconditional love. Where I have a personal bias that I think on human level, to human contact and relationship, there is no such thing as unconditional love. I think we all have conditions. And I don't think we like to think I have conditions, but I do. So it's looking at, I think, that unconditional love is a spiritual thing. All God requires is turn to Him, accept His Son, and grace abounds. But when we're talking about on human relationship level, there's a dynamic at play that we constantly have, a tension of this entitlement mindset. That's conditional. Follow? If I have an entitlement that you owe me something, I will have conditions. I've done X, Y, Z, so therefore I am now due whatever it is. This landing, there is a reasonable level of expectation, but I still think we need to recognize what am I attaching to that expectation, because a lot of times when my expectations are not met, who do I blame? Not me, typically. Rather than, what if I ask some harder questions of myself? I even came across the phrase on the idea of expectations, that happiness, a great definition of happiness is reality minus expectations. Let that sink in for a second. I see a couple of head nods. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I think on a personal level, an expectation for myself is a different dynamic than an expectation in a relationship. Because when I have an expectation in another fallen human being, they're going to disappoint me. They're going to frustrate me. They will not fulfill me. Or as the great movie Jerry Maguire, they will not complete me. One of the worst phrases ever. They should have ended it when she said, shut up, just shut up, done. That's end scene. But the idea of we all want this completion in a relationship, that's where expectations become problematic. But when you're talking on a personal level of, I have this desire, I have this motivation, this target I'm after, I think that's an okay thing. But there's still an element that's going to be troublesome in there. It does. Yes, it does. It does hit personal when those things fall out. Absolutely. The big major issues we all fight in marriage, if you think about it, what I keep coming across is money, sex, kids, and in-laws. There's your 4 high meaning subjects that we will fight about in marriage. And the reason is, it's the meanings we've attached to them. That's the troublesome thing. Let's pivot real quick, because I think this is a good place to kind of go away. I wasn't thinking we would go, but this is worth landing for a second. Everybody's familiar with the idea of boundaries? Yes? Anybody new? I mean, I mentioned the word chore play last week and nobody knew that one. So I want to make sure boundaries is a known thing. Okay. So boundaries, one of the best ways, Cloud and Townsend are one of the best books out there, just aptly named Boundaries. If you want to go on a deep dive of this subject, but one of the things that really is important to be close to other people is to have good boundaries. And one of the ways I think that's beneficial to think of the concept of boundaries is you look at it as concentric circles. There's 3 concentric circles, okay? So you have the internal circle is internal. The next circle out is personal. And then the next circle outside of that is relational. Okay, so internal, personal, relational. If you're taking notes, I'll let you draw it real quick because it's very simple. Well, internal boundary is the commitments I make to myself. Right, like you're describing, ma'am. That's exactly what that is. It's this, I'm going to get up and do this. I'm going to make sure I get this done. It's all these kinds of to-do lists, aspects of the way I want to act, who I want to be, the values I want to live according to. Those are internal boundaries. And typically, very, very few people know about those. We don't really share it with people because it's just kind of what drives me. It's what makes me, me. The next one, the personal boundaries, that's the one that most people know. We think of it as personal space. How close will I allow someone to get to me? What will I allow them to do while they're close to me? How long can they stay there? How can they treat me? That's the personal boundaries, right? That's almost like personal space. And then the layer outside of it is the relationship boundaries. And that's what you're describing of. We've had these agreed upon things. That's something that the relationship creates. This happens in marriages. This for sure happens in families. It happens in friendships. It happens in coworkers. Happens in churches. It happens in cities and HOAs. You kind of get where I'm getting with this? These are all agreed upon ways. Like how many of you are a part of an HOA and you sign that agreement? And then when you put something up in your front yard that you knew was not a part of the agreement and they took it down and you got mad at them. Follow what I'm saying? Because you're like, that's a stupid rule. Well, then you shouldn't have moved there. Right? Because you knew it going in. But that's the dynamic at play. And here's what I think is so important. If I stink at my own internal boundaries, I will stink at the others too. Right? That's why I believe so much in marriage is about growing up individually and then relationally. I believe marriage works more on you than you ever could and do on it. I think a lot of people come in thinking, we need to work on our marriage. No, it's working on you. How about let's get better at what it's working on? And so your internal boundaries, this means you start to make commitments and goals and tasks that you follow through with. And this is why it's so troublesome a lot of times, because I will wake up and have the best intentions of I'm hitting the gym and I'm eating right. And then when I have the time to go to the gym, I swing through Dairy Queen instead. But nobody knew I made the commitment to myself that I'm hitting the gym and eating right. But I knew. And so therefore, I can't enhance or enforce my own internal boundaries. Which means when somebody breaks an external boundary of mine, the personal, I'll likely have real trouble saying, you know what? No, I don't agree. I need you to step back. Or, no, I don't have to follow this. Here's best example. I had a client years ago that he was coming in for marriage issues. It was with his new wife, and his daughter from the previous marriage was grown. And so he came in, and as he's walking down the hall, I can hear him on the phone, and then he hangs up, and he comes in, and he is beet red. And he comes in and I'm like, what's up? He said, well, I was just on the phone with my daughter. Well, what happened? Well, she found out because why he was coming to see me is current wife had cheated. And so daughter had found out that day and called dad and was bad-mouthing wife. To which dad said, no, that's my wife. Please don't. To which she then overreacted and said, don't ever call me again. Don't ever text me. I'm done. And she hung up. And so we start talking through the rest of the session, and then we come back to it because he asked, well, Dr. Allen, what do I do? How do I approach that? And I said, well, to me, it seems like she tried to make a move she can't enforce. You guys see what I'm saying? What you could try to explain to her is, if you don't want to interact with me and you don't want to talk to me, then don't answer my calls and don't reply to my texts. But you don't get to determine if I pick up the phone and call my own daughter. Which then becomes this issue. Because play this out. I don't think this happened with him, but play this out because this does happen. Well, if this happens to you with a friend, a spouse, a kid, a parent, because all of us are so good at doing this to each other, and you call and they don't answer, and you call and they don't answer, and you call and they don't answer. Do we eventually stop, typically? Yeah. And then who do we blame? Them. Because they won't answer my call. But am I living according to what I hold dear in that moment? which is I want to have a relationship with them. And this is what's so troublesome. It's because when I reach out more, I'm just inviting more pain. But let me let you in on a little secret if you haven't already figured it out. You're still living in pain because you don't have a connection with them. And that's what you want. And so apparently with him, he reached out to her, told her that, and it lasted a week or so, and then they were talking again. But it's something empowering to realize, you know what? You don't get to determine what I do. You get to say no, or push back, or not answer, or disagree. That's what people do. And then so if you get better at that, you got the internal you can shore up, then you can shore up the personal, and then you get to the relational. And the relational is recognizing the way this plays out is one of three ways in marriages. Okay, if you're keeping notes, here you go. If you're not, this will be on the recording. We are either collaborative, collusive, or combative. Okay, collaborative is exactly what it sounds like. We collaborate on a mutually agreed upon goal, like you described. We're going to do this with our money, right? So we both work towards that goal. We both play our part. And what's interesting is if my partner all of a sudden doesn't, I don't go crazy and crumble. I hold on to myself and say, do we need to renegotiate this? Do we need to reevaluate this? Has something changed I'm not aware of? Where are you? Because it could just be, I'm not there. I don't want to do that goal. I think it's a stupid goal. Okay, well, then we didn't really have an agreement in the first place. If we're collusive, that's exactly what it sounds like. You just go along to get along. You don't speak up about something that really bothers you. But it keeps happening, and it keeps happening, and it keeps happening. And a lot of this, as we keep going on this class, where I'm planning to go is what does speaking up well actually look like? Because a lot of the times, if you think about it, how often are we most likely going to speak up? With a you statement or an I statement? You. Yeah. You need to stop. Yeah. Why haven't you? Right? But it's still just that dynamic of we want them to change because I'm owed something. That's where the entitlement comes into play. Right? Because you said I do. So therefore you are supposed to be in the same step as I am. So that's collusive. And this is something we all can do. I am very good at collusive alliances, unfortunately. And then there's combative alliances. And that's exactly what it sounds like. We just fight about it. And what's so interesting about this is, if your spouse comes in and they say something and it's got that tone, right? Everybody's got the picture of that tone. You know what it is that grates on you. Your spouse has it. Let me tell you, they're nodding too. Just so you guys realize, yes, they are. I saw them nod. So when they say it that way, you react to that tone, which is that really dealing with what was being presented to you? No. Now you're just getting down that path of overreacting to somebody's overreaction. Follow? That's where most married fights happen, is we overreact to my spouse's overreaction. And I am the one that deemed that they were overreacting. They weren't thinking that. They thought that was a very rational, logical reaction. But here's the other side of that coin, because we also have two sides of our inner beings, if you will, and emotional and thinking and feeling. Easy way to think about it. And is it shocking to think that a thinker would marry a feeler, and a feeler marries a thinker predominantly? Is that shocking at all? No. I mean, it's pretty common. And we wonder why there's conflict in marriage. Because you don't think life the same way. Rational logic and emotional logic do not communicate. But we really hope they do. Because I really hope that if you understand where I'm coming from, our problems will go away. But in reality, most of the time, I'll speak for me, most of the time, Pam knows exactly where I'm coming from, but we still have a problem. Let me ask you this way. Same concept, different question. If you think of everybody think of a gridlock issue you have in your marriage, right? Something that is a regular tension point. Doesn't have to be a big, huge, giant one. It could be, but think of a gridlock issue that you have that's been there for a while. And a gridlock issue, if you're new and you missed some of the weeks, is where what you want is blocked by what your partner wants. And these are around actions and behaviors. They're not around thoughts and feelings, because you can agree to disagree about a thought and a feeling, but you can't agree to disagree about an action or a behavior. You either spend money or you don't. You either have a child or you don't. You either have sex or you don't. You either move or you don't. You don't agree to disagree on those things. Right? Pam comes in and says, hey, we're going to save all of our paychecks from henceforth. Yeah, we're just going to agree to disagree about that. Right? Well, that doesn't solve the problem. Right? We got an issue that we got to face. Okay? So everybody think of a gridlock issue. When that comes up in your marriage, and you think through the normal dynamic and how you and your spouse fight that gridlock issue, is it possible that you could switch roles and play their part pretty well? Because you know where they're coming from, you know their stance, you know their belief, you know their value. So what is it that makes us so slow as human beings to think there's got to be a way I can explain my side better? They'll get it. It'll fix it. It'll solve the problem. It'll finally go, oh, now I get it. Oh, yes, I've wanted to do that all along. No, that's not the way it happens, because there is a process that goes on in this. And when you look at marital communication, it becomes like the personal development boot camp, if you will, because everything you communicate is carrying multiple things. And a lot of those are built on the dynamic that you already know about each other. But secretly, we're hoping that this will solve it. I read this book and I could phrase it this way. Yes. Now, here we go. I think whenever you do this, it makes me feel this. So I would like you to stop doing this, which is not a bad thing in and of itself if it'll help myself slow down. But to think that all I needed was Pam to articulate it perfectly to make me see the light? No. It doesn't happen that way. Because what really happens is you're just bringing on a deeper conflict. Somebody asked the question after the very first class, and I just touched on it 2 weeks ago, or at one point, I remember when, last week, that when I make a move, my spouse thinks I'm being manipulative. Right, that was the question I got asked after class. And I was like, well, you are being manipulative, because we all are. We all want what we want. And so if I walk into a restaurant and I give them an order, I'm being manipulative of that environment. It's socially acceptable there, but that's what happens. Funny thing is, we do this in marriage I kind of treat my spouse like they should just know. Right? It's like if I go into the restaurant and I just look at them. They should just know what I want. And if you've been in a place enough, that might be the case. Like, it's not a good thing when your donut lady knows who you are. Personal experience. Where you been? Losing weight. But I still want to come back here because I love donuts. But it's that element of, we have these stipulations and expectations, if you will, or these dynamics that are at play that we need to realize I am my biggest problem. Because it's not lack of information. More communication does not solve gridlock issues. This is about developing a better self in how you approach that issue. How you examine, what am I really holding on to? What really matters here? What's being exposed in me here? So then I can maybe articulate that. But even if I understand where my spouse is coming from, it still does not solve the problem. You follow that? Because a lot of us can get caught in all on me here. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room, but a lot of us can have this dynamic in us that when I know it's something Pam wants and I feel like I'm having to give it in to her to get it, there's a part of me that's like, no, I can't make it that easy. It's evil and it's cruel. I will own that. Because there is such thing as normal marital sadism. We should do a class on that, because it's true. I've done several classes on that before, but it's true. We have aspects of us that are just cruel. That's the human flesh side of us. That's the, no one's going to pull this over on me. No one's going to make me look this way. And that's those elements of that dynamic that's at play, that it's really difficult when it comes down to truly learning to love and care for my spouse. Okay? So when we set this all up, I want to give you guys a way to kind of look at what we need to be doing as a framework for our own path forward, if you will. The guy I trained under is a guy named Dr. David Schnarch. He just passed away about 3 years ago. He is not a Christian, but he is brilliant when it came to the dynamics of relationships. And he came up with a thing called the 4 points of balance. And I believe it's a biblical concept too. So the first point of balance is one of the goals we all have is to learn how to be more solid. Be who we are. This is the idea of God cares about our character. Every single one of you in here are wonderfully and beautifully and uniquely made. There is no one else out there like you. And that should be celebrated. So if we can learn to create a more character-developed person, I'm less tossed to and fro when life goes crazy. Because life will go crazy, right? Life will go crazy. Things will happen that's like, oh, I was not expecting that. Right? I mean, even just the small little thing, if you were in first service, I made a comment because I get a text from my son while Pam and he are driving here. And she hit something in the road and had a flat tire and just barely got off of I-75. So she's on the service road on the shoulder with a flat tire. And I made the mistake of looking at Life 360, seeing them stuck on the road, knowing I go up to do the host in 5 minutes. There ain't nothing I can do to help. But it was troublesome, right? Because I care. But apparently, my son is a rock star on how he took care of his mother. Hopped right out. I got this, Ma, and took care of it. Yeah, he will. But it's that element of a solid self can handle some of those things, while parts of me want to just lose my mind and go crazy and worry and fear and anxiety. Those are human things. But a solid self, a person of character, knows there's bigger things. God's still at the helm, right? We win. There's an element of realizing that I can stay consistent even under pressure. That's solid. Right? So a solid, flexible self, because there's also that aspect of flexibility, because if you're too rigid, that's not helpful. That's too structured. That's the my way only. That's, everybody follow what I'm talking about? So it's learning I can make decisions and go along at times without losing myself. That's when I'm being pressured in marriage all the time. Pressure to conform to my spouse's way of life while I'm doing the same thing to them. So solid, flexible self. The next one is quiet mind and calm heart. And that's that idea of learning how to soothe myself, how to calm myself down. Prayer is a huge aspect of this. Deep breaths is a huge aspect of this. I heard a story years ago that the reason the oxygen masks fall from the top of the plane, if it's going down, obviously if it's way up, 30,000, 20,000 feet, you need it. But once it gets down below that, you don't need the oxygen for your survival, but oxygen is a sedative. Deep breaths, 3 deep breaths, fills you with oxygen, which calms you down. Because the last thing a pilot needs is a plane full of people going crazy while they're trying to figure out how to save that thing. And so there's an element, if I can learn to calm myself down, quiet my mind, which for some of us is the hardest thing in the world to do. Anybody else suffer from that syndrome of you go to bed and all of a sudden, ding, 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 all these things, your mind just starts racing? Right. Learning how to calm that down. That's where scripture comes into play. That's where prayer comes into play. That's where conversations comes into play. And let me give you guys this one. That's where naming what's going on and writing it down comes into play. Because you offload it out of your mind. You can even talk about it to calm your mind down. Even to yourself. I tell clients all the time that are worriers and anxious people, talk to yourself all day long. And if you're worried about how people might perceive you, put earbuds in. They'll think you're on the phone. It works. There's actually research that shows, this is not a great thing for my profession, but we did come out ahead slightly. Research that shows you can talk to a therapist, you can talk to a friend, you can journal, or you can talk to a wall. All produce about the same positive results. Therapy about 2% higher. So we did barely squeak into the lead there. But it's true. I mean, there's a whole therapeutic theory out there from Carl Rogers that the whole concept that you get trained in is Rogerian therapy is reflecting back to your client what they're saying so they hear themselves. Because this is the other really cool thing. This is from work from Dan Siegel. He's a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon, I believe. But he wrote a book called Mindsight. And in it, he talks about, for those of us that struggle with depression and anxiety, that most often is triggered deep in the amygdala. There's emotional memories in your amygdala, which is the core of your brain, right? That's the deep center of your brain. And the problem with the memories that are stored in there is there's no time stamp. It's just the feeling. This is why when I was raised as a latchkey kid, growing up from 4th grade till I graduated, my parents both worked, and my sister was older, so we kind of lived separate parallel lives. And so I woke up to an empty home and came home from school every day to an empty home. And so this is why at 52 years old, I can walk into my house and all of a sudden feel like I'm 12 when no one's there. And it feels as exactly like I was 12 because it's the center part of your brain. Well, what he discovered is if you will talk about what you're feeling out loud, you hear yourself, which that is the prefrontal cortex, the auditory part. So your brain gets to look in on itself. That's fascinating how God created this whole thing. And so I believe the more we do this, the more my outer part of my brain reaches into my inner part of the brain and pulls that stuff out. So I still feel it at times, but I don't relive it. And there's a huge difference. Those of you that have had any kind of trauma in your life, the goal of trauma therapy is get to where you no longer relive it, but you'll still remember it. Because we don't forget these things, nor do I think we want to. Because some of these scars are what make us beautiful. To quote Alicia Cara, in case you're... My daughter, sorry, that's buried in there because we went to a concert. So that was the name of her song. But it's that element of, I want to move into this part of me where I can confront life and handle life better. Because let me let you in on a little secret. How many of you in here, and I do want to show of hands, how many of you in here really do want a more intimate, connected marriage? Or an intimate, connected relationship if you're not in a marriage right now? Because I think this applies to everybody. Yeah? Okay. We all want a deeper relationship. But are we willing and do we have the courage to do what's necessary to get there? Because the more close I get to somebody, the scarier it's going to be at times. The more troublesome it's going to be at times. The more I'm going to learn about them that I don't like at times. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. Can I back up and not know that now? No. That's called intimacy. That's called a deeper bond. Because we often think of intimacy as just one-sided things. Knowing them. Or them knowing me, but it's both. Intimacy is knowing and being known. That's the concept at play. And so if I can learn a more solid self and a more calm heart, or quiet mind and calm heart, then I can also get into, this is a tactical one for those of you that want the tactical things. I need to learn better. Number 3 is grounded responding. And that's the idea of I learn how to respond appropriately to what goes on in my life. Because there are some things that will happen that will scare the pants off you. And if you are one that's prone to be emotionally reactive with that, and you know that about yourself, now you're in a better stance to go, hold on, I'm not handling this well. Let me take a moment to calm myself down because I'm really wigging out. That's a huge relationship step move. Because now all of a sudden, you are trying to approach what's being presented without flooding it to get it to go away. Because if you lose your mind, where's the focus going to go? On you losing your mind. Because your spouse is going to go, why is this always such a big deal? And now they're fighting about that. Because you're like, it's not. Because remember that one time in 1983 where I handled that? Really? Okay. I might have just dated most of the room out of that. Okay. I did. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll speak to me. But it's that element of how often do I need to just get better at reacting? Anybody in here, like myself, that can have a quick trigger on some instances? Okay. Anybody in here, for sure, like myself, that are expert level under reactors? Because this is just as insidious and troublesome. The one that gets all the focus is the person that loses their ever-loving mind. Because they just get flooded with emotions. But they still don't have, they still are exactly the same as the person that doesn't engage in the first place. You guys see it? Because you're not facing what's in front of you. You're avoiding it. You're stonewalling it. You're defensive about it. And so if you recognize this dynamic with grounded responding, sometimes grounded responding means I actually learn to respond and say what I think. Say what I believe. Because there could be times where, based on the maps you have of your spouse, I'm going to keep using this example. If you've been married any length of time beyond like 7 years, you have a pretty accurate map of your spouse. It just may be out of date a little bit. Because one time, 27 years ago, Pam reacted this way. Therefore, anytime that topic comes up, I won't bring it up because she reacted that way 27 years ago. Right? You guys see what I'm talking about here? Because that's what happens. Rather than realizing I'm actually dealing with Pam 8.0. For those of you that are software geeks. Or no, you're probably more 8.2.5. Right? But what's interesting about the dynamic is I still can have this component in my mind of that's still Pam 2.0. And I actually had this happen. We were on an anniversary trip to Orange Beach, and we were out shopping one afternoon and just kind of had this fun little banter going on as we're just hanging out that day. And she reacted to me in a way that was like, whoa, that was different. I don't know how to take that one. And it wasn't a negative at any rate. It was just kind of a move I hadn't seen her do. And so I'm getting in the truck and I'm like, okay, I got to update some things here. Did you mean this or this with that statement? Oh, I meant this. Okay, well, then I got to update my software. Because that wasn't who I was thinking. You were at that moment. Because I still see you as that. You guys follow me? How often can we hold our spouse's past against them? Not realizing, what do I want from them? To no longer hold my past against me. That's the insidiousness of all this concept. As it's always exposing things. And how do I see it as, I just need to get better at taking on myself. And one of the best ways to do it is through grounded responding. And if I lose my mind or I react, the soonest I react, as soon as I realize I've done that, the next best step is to come forward and own that. You know what? I didn't handle that one well. I'd like a do-over. I didn't hear you that moment. Please tell me again. I got distracted by this. Please I'm here. Go. Or, you know what? I was afraid to engage on that. But I really want to do it this way. I really want to try this. Because it's important. Okay? So grounded responding is number 3. And then number 4 is meaningful endurance. This is the biblical concept of perseverance. We persevere and we see it through. Because every single thing we have in this world, I believe, the things we value the most are the things I've had to work the hardest for. Right? If you are one of those that built a financial empire, you have a different value on that than your kid does when you die and they take it over and spend it all. Because they don't know the value of $1. But when I meaningfully endure, I learn, I see it through. Those of you that have had children understand meaningful endurance. 9 months of it. And there's parts of that going, no thank you, that I'm watching. But you do it. Because there's something it produces that's so valuable, so important. And I think we can use this in our own life and in our own way we approach things. When I see it as I can meaningfully endure this, I will produce something of value. There was a quote I heard from Donald Miller, who's an author. He's written a whole bunch of books. He's really one of my favorite authors. And he made a comment. He was in a coffee shop working, and he heard these 2 guys behind him having a conversation. And one of them was talking about they were going to leave their marriage. And the other one was like, why would you do that? He's like, well, it's just not important. I just don't value it. And I love it. This is kind of like you calling me out this morning. The friend was like, that's because you haven't fought for it. No value in things you don't fight for. Yeah. But now I have to wrestle with what's being exposed in me on this is, do I really want to fight for this? Because it'd be a whole lot easier if I would just go my own way, or they would just give in and do what I want to do, rather than seeing it as, no, marriage is a constant tension of growing ourselves up, of understanding more of me in the context of her, understanding the more of her. That's the dynamic of marriage. That's where I think you start to see a profoundness of what happens. This also happens in life when we make really stupid choices. And I learn from them. Because a mistake is just a mistake. We would tell our kids this. You do something stupid, that's 1 point on a graph. You do another one, now I know we're going up or we're going down. Because I can have a trend. Right? You learn from it. It's the best thing you can do. And one year, when our daughter was 16, we're sitting at the table, and she just offhandedly said, if you could go back and change the biggest mistake you've made in your entire life, would you? And I looked at Pam and was like, whoa, because the biggest mistake I made in my life was an emotional affair. 6 years in. She gave the ring back. I said, no, give me a moment. I got to grow myself up. Didn't know this whole stuff. I just knew I was an immature kid at 28. And so that launched me on a path of who I am today. And so I looked at Pam, and then I looked at Cindy and said, no, I would not change that mistake. I don't want to go through that again, but I'm not going to change that. Because of what you can learn from the fact that we are all fallen human beings. Grace can abound, growth can happen, and love ultimately starts to play out even more, because you realize, I'm not owed any of this, but I sure want it. And so how am I presenting and pursuing things to try to get a partnership in this, in a collaboration, in friendships, and in marriage, and in parenting, and in colleagues? How am I doing this in everything? Because let me let you guys in on a little secret. When you start to do this in your marriage, you'll be doing it in all areas of your life. Right? I have a client right now that anytime she's not sure of herself, I refer to her as the Chipotle girl. Because the first place she took a huge step was in the line at Chipotle. She's asking for her order. She is gluten-free and I never remember these terminologies. Gluten intolerant, thank you. And she saw them put something together in a pan that was mixed. And she said, no, please make that over. Right? And that was a huge step. For me, that's the easiest thing in the world to say. But for her, it was a huge step. And she was so proud of herself because she saw herself take a step forward in a solid self and respond well and create a life that she's determining more of. You know what I mean? That's what we want in marriage. I really believe that's what I want in marriage. I want to be involved in a partnership and in a collaboration in all of my friendships. I want to have a collaboration where the people I'm with, I know I can count on them. And if they can't, they'll tell me. And we figure it out. And we negotiate and we collaborate more. That's what makes life so good. That's what makes marriage so good. And that's what makes it to where relationships takes us places we can't go on our own. And that's what I hope and pray for all of you, is that you can kind of get an idea of how am I recognizing what's coming up in me versus what I wish was or what I prefer was, and see that is my playground for my own growth. And if I can take on myself better, then I can take on my spouse, maybe. Like Dr. Schnarch used to say it this way. In marriage, we have to realize we're living with an emotional terrorist. And then there's my spouse to deal with too. A great phrase, because it's so true. Because I want what I want, and I don't need to justify it. Just give it to me. Rather than, no, how am I coming across? How am I dealing with this? How am I inviting? How am I inspiring that? That's the dynamic that I believe God wants for us. I think that's why relationships exist. Okay? So as we keep going next week, I'm going to send out an email where we're going next week because I don't even know. We went away completely different than I thought we would go tonight. So, I'll go to the drawing board and we'll have something to continue on with this. And if you missed, we missed you. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that to the camera, I guess. So let's close out with a prayer. God, we thank you for relationships. We thank you for the aspect of how you work in our lives and in our relationships, Father. And I just pray that we will see more and more of you in all the interactions that we have, so that we can understand you more and understand ourselves more and grow more and more like you in all of our relationships. Father, I just pray a blessing over the relationships that are here, over the families, the marriages, the friendships, the co-workers, the sons and daughters, every role we play. Father, I just pray that you are involved in every aspect of it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.